All right. So good evening. Welcome to campus. This is obviously a background, but not too dissimilar to exactly what it looks like right now outside. I am really delighted to be here with you all and to have you back on campus, and really delighted to be here with Alvin. We'll get to some background and some of Alvin's upbringing in a minute, but I just wanted to set the stage with a little bit of detail on Alvin Hall. Alvin is class of '73. He was a Bowdoin trustee for a decade, and upon stepping down from the board about 10 years ago, he joined the Bowdoin College Museum of Art Advisory Council and has served since then. He's received the Alumni Service Award, that in 2019, and I think most of you know that last year when we launched the From Here campaign in February, which I know does feel like a million years ago now, Alvin was the leadoff speaker for that event and did a remarkable job in spite of having a horrendous head cold. So Alvin, I still am incredibly grateful to you for soldiering through that night. Thank you. It is very hard to pigeonhole Alvin. He is a true polymath. He's an internationally renowned financial educator, television and radio broadcaster, now podcaster. He is a best-selling author, a regular contributor to magazines, newspapers, websites, and so forth. And in addition to his deep skill and impact on all things financial, he is passionate about art and an avid art collector, in particular, a collection of African-American art. And he brings that passion and understanding, sensibility to the college in his work with the Bowdoin College Museum of Art. And we are incredibly grateful for Alvin's deep engagement with the college over so many years. So Alvin, welcome. It's great to have you here. You're so super to do this with us.
Thank you. I'm so glad to be here. And we're talking about one of my favorite subjects, the Green Book. So
yes. Driving the Green Book is Alvin's latest project, which the subject of tonight's discussion. The 9th in the series came out today. I haven't had a chance to listen to number 9, but I have listened to the prior 8. It has been greeted with great reviews, both here in the US as well as internationally. And you will, for those of you that have listened to it in whole or in part, you understand why. Those of you who haven't had an opportunity to do so yet will understand why by the end of the next hour. Alvin, before we jump into the Green Book itself, can you give us a little bit of background on your upbringing? You were raised in the rural panhandle of Florida during Jim Crow era, and talk us through that a little bit and how you ended up here at Bowdoin.
Yes, I was born in a little village called Wakulla, Florida, 52 people, all of whom were my relatives. And I only found out about a year ago that all of my relatives moved down from the Donaldson plantation in Donaldsonville, Georgia. And this is where all of them landed. My parents were met in a restaurant. I am the result of their meeting. And I had 7 brothers and sisters, and we were raised very poor, but we really didn't know that because my parents were very firm about cleanliness and proper etiquette and going to church, and that was wonderful. And I was the alien child. I was the unusual child who was very verbal and very curious, and why was my favorite word. Eventually, in 1968, the county schools integrated, and I went from an all-Black school to a predominantly white school, and I was the only African-American student to continue to get straight A's, which even sort of solidified my alien status. A teacher there, Mr. Walter Scott, really thought that I was very bright and decided to fight for me to become a part of a Lyndon Baines Johnson program called Project Upward Bound. When I was in Brunswick, there was a Project Upward Bound in Brunswick. I became a part of that. Miss Freddie Grooms, who was head of that project, said that I should talk to her friend, Dr. Joel Fleischman at Yale. He had started Yale Summer High School, and I talked to Dr. Joel Fleischman, and he interviewed me, and I was accepted to Yale Summer High School, where I met a future Bowdoin classmate, Maurice Butler. I think Maurice was in that program also. From that program, I became aware of New England schools for the first time. I also became aware that there was so much more to learn than I knew about in that small Florida county. So I made the decision, without ever talking to my mother or my grandmother or any of my relatives, that I was going to leave home and come to school in New England. A critical part of that decision was the acknowledgement that my parents would never travel north to meet me. Never, never, never. And they never did. So part of my coming to Bowdoin and part of the skill set that I developed there was how to build family. And so one of the things I took away from Bowdoin College was that I can build family anywhere in the world I go.
Thank you for sharing that. So let's turn to the Green Book. The Negro Motorists Green Book is the formal title of the book. Can you tell us a little bit about the background of the book, how it came to be and what it was, and then we'll move into the project and the podcast.
The Negro Motorist Green Book was created by Victor Hugo Green and his wife, Alma. They lived in Sugar Hill, which in those days was a place of great activism. And they would drive every summer to visit Alma's relatives in Virginia. On the way down, they often couldn't buy gasoline. They certainly could not find a place to stay. They couldn't buy food. And Victor found this frustrating. And among their friends, they would share information. So Victor decided to create a publication, which was very thin in the first edition and focused primarily on New England, New York, Connecticut, New Jersey, farther north, about places where they could stop to find safe harbor, to be able to buy gasoline. Interestingly, in that first issue, it was primarily focused on automobile repair shops, because that was one of the great things that people worried about when they were on the road. So the Green Book was published from 1936 to 1967. The first edition up to 1968 only covered the East Coast up to the Mississippi. And then with the publication of the 1938 edition, it then spread across America and included every state but two. And it was a guide to help African Americans during segregation and Jim Crow in the South find places to sleep. They were called tourist homes and motels, places to eat, places to have fun, places to rest. But more importantly, it also gave them guides for etiquette on the road. If this happened, what you should do.
All right, thank you for that. And I do want to say to our alums, parents, students, faculty, staff who are here with us tonight, that you can, I've got a series of questions that I'll go through with Alvin, but feel free to put your questions in the Q&A as we go along, and we'll turn to those as well. And there's not a question, but Deborah Foote says, just want to say hello from Tallahassee, go Florida Panhandle. So there you go. Okay. This podcast, this project was very personal for you, Alvin. Can you talk to us about why you chose to do it and how it relates to who you are and the impact on you personally?
Every time someone asks me that question, I think of Scarlett O'Hara and that line from Gone with the Wind, as God as my witness, because I have stuck with this project a long time. In 2015, 2016, I was flying someplace in the world and I read an article about the Green Book. And I thought, that's interesting. I didn't know anything about the Green Book at that time. At virtually the same time, a BBC producer in Wales named Jeremy Grange was also reading about the Green Book. And through a connection via the BBC, I agreed to have my name put on a program that the BBC was going to do about the Green Book. In 2016, we did a road trip through the South. And the idea was to go from my past in Tallahassee, Florida, into the present, Ferguson, Missouri at that time, and to follow the old civil rights route through Montgomery, Selma, Jackson, Memphis, and on to Ferguson, and create a program about the places that were in the Green Book and to talk to people about the Green Book. One of the great moments from that first trip was an interview I did with Brian Stevenson at the Equal Justice Initiative. It was about a 90-minute interview that ended up being really the heart and soul of the program. Well, that program came out in the United Kingdom, great reviews, incredible. We never had that program air in the States. We tried. We were hugely supported by NPR. They had me on to talk about the program. Nobody picked up the program. Then, many years later, when the movie came out, I went to the movie premiere. And at the end of that, they had the principals on stage. And the moderator asked Viggo Mortensen, Mahershala Ali, Peter Farrelly, all the people, had they heard of the Green Book before they did the movie? Everyone said no. Mm. And with that, I said, I'm going to create a project involving the Green Book in America. Luckily, Jeremy Grange agreed with me. And he said that there was so much we didn't cover. So I then thought about, how can I create a program? And I had two great inspirations. The first was a show at the Museum of Modern Art about Jacob Lawrence called The Great Migration Series. And in that, they had a great infographic. And in that infographic, it showed how much the population of various cities had increased as a result of the Great Migration. The population of Detroit was 1.2% in 1910. And then by 1970, the African-American population was 43.6%, the largest increase of the city. So that was going to be my starting point, because a lot of African-Americans who moved to Detroit would have to therefore take that trip. And we decided to follow various estuaries that we figured out from studying that migration series and visiting various towns and cities along the way. So that's the way it came about. One last point. Mm. I was rejected and rejected. It was like being on a dating app, swipe left, swipe left. So as I was pitching this all over the place, and then I was out to dinner one evening with a man who had been my agent briefly. And he said, oh, I'm now at Macmillan. I think there's a lady there, Alicia Martino, who would be interested in it. So I went to Alicia and she understood it like that. And that's the way this came about. She really got it from moment one, and she championed that series throughout the entire approval process.
So when you talk about getting it, Alvin, what is it that other folks were not getting? What weren't they seeing? What did she see in this?
Most people thought of the Green Book as an out-of-date, obsolete publication. Why do people need to know about this? They thought it was something that had virtually no cultural significance at all. Mm. It was just something that people didn't need anymore. Why do we need to go this? We live in a post-racial world. Alyssa got two things. One, that this was a record of Black entrepreneurship during a time of segregation and Jim Crow, because these were all Black-owned businesses set up to serve Black travelers, because the majority of white businesses did not just dismiss them. They were often hostile to them. And Melissa got my passion. Most people saw it sort of as an intellectual exercise for me, but she said, no, you really believe in this. I said, I've been working to make this happen for so long because I know there's power in these stories. And I played her Brian Stevenson's interview from the first series. And I said, this is what motivates me.
Interesting. Is the Brian Stevenson interview ever going to air in the States?
You can go to the BBC's website and you can put in the Green Book on BBC Radio 4 and it will pop up and you can download it. And he is punctuated. He shows up throughout the program, but we gave him the final word in that series. So he closed it. It was a beautiful interview.
All right. Good to know. I will do that. I hope others do too. So you talk about, or you mentioned the kind of reaction that you got as the Green Book being an artifact of history, and kind of a dismissed artifact of history. and it is an artifact, although a powerful, as you so rightly said, record of Black entrepreneurship and the challenges facing African Americans in the Jim Crow era. But for me as well, and you and I have talked about this, it is a vivid reminder of today.
Yes.
And the first 3 minutes, I think it's Hezekiah Jackson, if I remember his name right, Hezekiah Jackson, it brings you right to today. So can you talk about its relevance to today, when, as you were making the journey and in your own travels and journey through life, what is it about what you saw and experienced that's most changed, and what's most the same for you?
When we started these interviews, we would always ask people, do you have a travel experience or a travel story that you can share with us? And Hezekiah told the story of being in Detroit. His Aunt Beattie had died, and Aunt Beattie's husband didn't have a car. So he asked his father and his mother to go over to the white family where she worked to pick up her pay. And he drives, and they drive there. Before they even get out of the car, the police show up and challenge his father. And they call his father boy and ask his father, did you steal this nice car? Do you work for some white people who gave you that car? And he tells the story in the most amazing visual way. You just can't ignore it. But what's most important about the story is the collateral damage in the story, which most people don't think about. And that collateral damage was that his son said, did you just hear that man call dad boy? And they had so much respect for their father, they would never have done that. And it's that damage to all the people observing the event that's very important. Throughout the broadcast, whether it was Hank Saunders in Selma, Alabama, whether it was Eric Finley in Mobile, Alabama, everyone told the story, and then there would be a pause, and they would draw the line too. It's just like driving while Black today. It may have morphed into something different, but the underlying motive is still the same. That if you find yourself in the wrong white neighborhood, or dealing with the wrong cop, or a cop who's in a bad mood, something could go wrong. And people forget that in those days, especially in the South, any white person could stop a Black person for any reason whatsoever, for any reason. So you see echoes of this today, even though frequently I didn't really want to look at them, to be honest with you, because I had a 2,000-mile drive ahead of me. And as we were on the road, I kept thinking, what happens if we get stopped? Because I'm traveling, there are 3 Black people in a car, and we're traveling through the South. And for 2 of them, it's their first trip south. So it was a little unnerving, but there were so many stories in which the people we interviewed, Clayton, drew the line to today.
Yep. Now, when you think about your journey, what's the aspect of what you experienced that felt most different from what you experienced growing up, and from the stories that you heard, with the biggest change over time?
I think that the biggest change was that we never worried that much about our needs while we were on the road. I think that traveling through some small towns, which we did, we didn't worry too much about getting stopped that much. I think that in general, we experienced a level of hospitality on the road that was rather nice overall. But I can tell you that the group worried a bit. When I conceived the podcast, I did not want it to be just my point of view. You know, I'm a 68-year-old Black man born in the segregation in the South. And I worried that the experiences would be way too close to my own experiences. And indeed, I had to actually walk out of 2 interviews because I started to cry in the middle of the interview.
Right.
I still can't even think about it, really. My associate producer Janae Woods Weber is biracial, Black father, white mother, raised in New England in a largely white town, who had no knowledge of her African-American roots at all. So for her, this was like, she wanted to know more. So this was like opening doors to little stories that she had heard. The field producer was Olowakemi Andalusui. She was born in Nigeria, but raised in a fundamentalist environment in Springfield, Illinois. So she had virtually no knowledge of the African-American experience, being raised so religious in the small town. So often we would discuss things in the car as we drove from one location to the next. And sometimes there just wasn't the ability to talk about what had just been told to us. For example, in Nashville, Evelyn Nettles told us about growing up and visiting her Aunt Essie down in Moss Point, Mississippi, and how one of the white people in that town would dress up on weekends in a sheriff's outfit that he bought, and he would stop people and have them do minstrel dances for him and his girlfriend, and how he picked the wrong guy one Saturday night and the guy beat him up and made him take off the uniform, and the black guy had to leave town. And then she told us about how her grandmother Essie went to talk to the local mayor, where she had worked in his kitchen, and to get assurances that the people's fear that the white people in the community would maybe become violent and engage in terrorist activities, and get his assurance that that would not happen. And Essie did that.
Interesting. So I'm going to cut in with a question here, and it's actually from Maurice. So there's a two-parter here.
Okay.
Was a little disappointed in the movie, the Green Book, and wanted to know what you thought about it. And secondly, have you ever thought about turning your work, the podcast, into a movie or a television series?
I had a problem with the movie. If you had been sitting next to me during that premiere, you would have had to sort of hold my hand down, because I would go, hold it, that's not right. The scenes in the movie where Mahershala Ali stops at a Green Book location, it was completely wrong. For somebody of Don Shirley's status, he would have stayed in the nicest hotel in that town. If a hotel or motel were not available, he would have stayed in the home of the most successful African-American in that town. It could have been the principal of the high school. It could have been the owner of the insurance company, biggest insurance company. It could have been the president of the Black-owned bank. They would never have stayed in some place that sleazy. So as I said to a friend of mine later on, it was very clear to me that no one in that production staff had any real knowledge of what it was like to travel through the South in those days. The movie was a budding movie. That's all it was. And I always say to everybody, you have to keep in mind who wrote the script. It was the son of the driver. So the movie was told from his point of view, not Don Shirley's point of view. So for that, I say, fine, it's the driver's movie. It's not Don Shirley's movie. As far as turning the podcast into a television or a movie, I think a television series would be better. That would be great. If somebody knows somebody out there who's interested in it, send them my way. It's a lot of work to get this type of series done. We recorded, in fact, we shot this like a movie. We recorded this like a movie. We had 12 days to do the entire interview. We did over 45 interviews in 12 days, and we drove 2,021 miles. So it was a schedule. And then after we got the interviews, we realized that we had something far richer than what we imagined, far richer than what we imagined. Those personal stories that people shared with us became the core of how I would build the podcast series. And I would love to do it as a movie. I would love to bring these people's story to visual life. And maybe that will happen. I have other ideas I also want to do as movies, but you have to always pitch.
How did you find the individuals that you ultimately interviewed?
So we had a field producer, Kemi, and Kemi and I would talk, and I would say, let's start out first with looking at the NAACP in the local area and ask the NAACP, is there a historian or a Black society or sororities? And then she would call those people that we met, and then they would refer us to other people. Often in almost every city, there was a group of people who gave a tour of the former Black communities in those cities. So through a whole series of the historical societies and the NAACP, we met those people. Now, not everybody we met made a good interview. Some of the interviews were just really terrible. But the major thing is that we were able to locate people who could speak passionately, who were willing to share their firsthand experiences with us, and who were willing to trust us that we would tell their story accurately and without trying to make it hugely melodramatic in any way.
Yeah.
And finding those people were, and even during the trip while we were driving, Clayton, we were on the phone trying to convince some people to let us interview them. And some said no, some said yes.
Yeah. Have you heard back from folks who were interviewed about the podcast and their reactions to it and so forth?
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Tony Bingham, the artist we interviewed in Montgomery, Alabama, was really wonderful. He's been in touch with me 3 or 4 times. The person whose call probably means the most to me personally is Frank Figures in the episode on Jackson, Mississippi, which is called Harlem, Mississippi, episode 3. And he has that beautiful voice and tells that story at the beginning of it. And he's called me a couple of times. And when I saw him, the last time I saw him in Jackson, I said, you know, you are my uncle. You speak like my uncle. And your voice is going to be the center of a program because I'm not going to let that go. And he said, when I said, Frank, you opened the show, he went, my, you kept your word. It was so touching, so touching. So I'm in touch with a couple of them. And the lady who worked at the place where we had dinner in Jackson, Mississippi, no, in Nashville, Tennessee, Jalela Hawk. And I have become fast friends. Her son lives in New York City. And when she comes to New York City, we chat, we get together, we go out to dinner.
Right. So I'm going to cut to a question here from a trustee colleague of yours, Sheldon Stone.
Yes.
Alvin, what was your experience in 1970 in Brunswick? Did you find it a welcoming place or was it challenging?
I was from a small town. So Brunswick to me was quite eye-opening, and I never really found it that challenging. I think because I was always raised with a single motto that my parents gave to me, and that was, you have to be open and give people the room to hurt you. That was an interesting motto. It took me years to figure out exactly what they meant. So I came to Brunswick with quite an open heart, with the idea that I had a lot to learn. I remember meeting the head of the John Birch Society. And by the way, I didn't know exactly what the John Birch Society was. And I met this guy at McBean's, the record store that was in town in those days. And I remember he said something like, you should be happy being a Negro. And I turned and looked at him. I thought, this is so odd. And in general, I didn't have that many problems. There were a couple of run-ins, but not on campus at all. It would usually be in the town, but I didn't hold that stuff to my heart in any way at all. I figured, well, I'm not going to see those people again. So erase, move on to the next time.
So there's just a broader social commentary before we get to the specific question, Alvin, but there, as we've learned again for the umpteenth time, most recently, there's a veneer that's put over the experience of Black Americans by white Americans. And one of the kind of myths that circulates is that the Jim Crow experience was a Southern experience. when in fact that's far from the case. But you talk about this in the context, in the podcast, in the context of Detroit. And can you talk a little bit about Jim Crow and Detroit and what you learned, what you may have known, but what you elucidate in the podcast there?
So Detroit is really central to this development. I have a very good friend who lived in Detroit, and every summer his father would drive him and his brother south. And his father, who was a very smart man, knew the different Jim Crow codes in every state as they drove south and would explain them to his son. As Black people moved to Detroit, first, a lot of the communities were integrated in Detroit initially, because you had people coming over from Europe, Italians, Greek people moving into the Detroit area. But then, because of federal housing, and the Federal Housing Authority would not make mortgages if the mortgages were designed to integrate the communities. So you have a place like near 8 Mile Road where there's the famous wall that was built. And that wall separates a Black community from a white community. It's a 6-foot high wall still there and runs a half a mile to separate the communities. In Detroit, Jamon Jordan, who was our guide there, talked about the fact that there were sundown communities all over Detroit.
Can you explain what a sundown community is?
A sundown community or a sundown town is one where by law or by practice, Black people had to be out by sundown. If you were not, you could be harassed, arrested, or worse. And all around Detroit, as people moved to whiter and whiter suburbs, a lot of the suburbs were de facto sundown communities. And Detroit is very interesting in that way, because what happened in Detroit, everybody lived harmoniously, but the government gave them cover. The government would say, okay, you can buy a house here, but you can't, or you can buy a house here, but you can't. And if somebody who is from Detroit, you go look at the covenants in many of these communities, you'll see that not only were there no African Americans, but they used the term swarthy in the covenants, and swarthy covered Italians, Greeks, and Jews. That was the sort of code word they used. And so the idea was that you'd keep these communities more pure. So people think that sundown towns are a phenomenon of the South. No, they were much, much bigger in the North. Levittown was a sundown community, right? And you look south, Fort Lauderdale was a de facto sundown community. So all over the North and the South, there were lots of these places. And can I say one other thing about that?
Yeah, please. Yeah.
Yeah. What's interesting about that is that, so I just appeared on a PBS show program called Driving While Black, which was created by Rick Burns. And I got an email from a friend of mine, white from Cincinnati, which touched me, but also was so interesting. He had no idea about the experience of driving while Black in America, because he lived in his lovely white suburb. They had a Black maid. They didn't know anything about the Black maid. They didn't ask any questions about the Black maid, about her family. But because the government would make these decisions about who could live where, he had cover. But we have been friends for a quarter of a century. And I've talked about these things. And when he wrote me that email, I thought, this is so interesting, because inadvertently he's saying to me, I didn't believe you, Alvin, until now. I didn't believe that what you said was true until now. And that was one of those things, once you have that kind of knowledge and you look at somebody, you see them differently. You just can't help but see them differently. We're still friends, but I do see him slightly differently.
Yep. I'm going to cut to a question here. This one's from Ann Goodyear.
Yes.
Alvin, this is fascinating. Do you anticipate that the interviews you recorded will someday be made available to other researchers? Are there plans to archive the interviews? And could you speak about the visual documentation of your drive by the artist Jonathan Calm?
Okay. The interviews and transcripts from everything that we've done will be available thanks to Apple and Macmillan. Macmillan is transcribing everything. Macmillan has a huge plan for this series. They want to make it available to high schools, elementary schools, educational institutions, and historical societies all across America. That is just a great joy to me that they want to do that with the series. So it will be available. We are also looking at what we can do with the raw footage and that I have, all of those interviews, and how we can edit those into a form that will make them palatable for the people who interview, because people have stutters and they, we need to clean them up a bit for everybody. On my first trip, the one I did for the BBC, Jonathan Calm, who is a professor of photography at Stanford University, accompanied me on the trip and took over 2,000 photographs of everything we did on that particular trip. Jonathan is using that work to create his own book and his own exhibition. And I'm hoping sometime that he and I will be able to collaborate on a book in which that will include both the stories that were recorded and images he shot in this town and these towns and cities that we visited along the way. But he owns that archive. So it's always about negotiation.
That's right. Well, I don't know if he's any match for you, but and finishes with a thank you so much for everything you do for the Bowdoin College Museum of Art. So when you were talking a bit about your upbringing and moving into an integrated school, maintaining that A+ grade point average, and the challenges that brought for you, it brings similarity to a conversation you had with Senator Hank Sanders in Alabama. So I think he was the first since Reconstruction Black senator in the state legislature there. He served there for 30 or 40 years now. But he talks about the idea, and he had his own experience as a younger person that he talks to you about burying your ambitions and the necessity to be able to do that. Can you talk about your conversation with him and how this resonated with you in this issue?
Yes, he talked about the fact that when he was a little boy, his mother worked for one of the richest men in the county who was a huge landowner, and they would give them the newspaper to use as toilet paper because they had an outhouse. And he read newspapers all the time. He loved reading, and he was in class, and they would ask them on a Friday, what did they want to be when they grew up? And they asked them on a Friday. So hopefully the inspiration of that moment would carry them to the weekend till school began on Monday. And he stood up and said that he wanted to be a lawyer. And first the class was silent, and then everyone started to laugh and laugh and laugh. And he started to cry, and his teacher had to force him to sit down. And many years later, he realized that they were laughing because they had never seen a lawyer, and certainly not a Black lawyer. So when he said he wanted to be Thurgood Marshall, it was beyond their imagination. And that moment was so rich for me. It was one of the times I had to leave.
Yep.
Because when I was a kid, you don't know that you're unusual. What you know is that people respond to you differently. And so when I was in elementary school, I remember it was third grade, my teacher was named Miss Maddie S. Williams. It's funny, it was like a therapy session, it all comes back to me. And there was a test, and I got a perfect score on every single test that semester. And we just kept having to, and I got a perfect score. And the hostility toward me on the bus home, in the yard, it was so strange. So like Hank Saunders, I decided that I wouldn't tell anybody things. And Hank decided he would keep it to himself, and he would run that embarrassing moment through him, and it would give him strength. And I learned in the third grade to keep my mouth shut.
Right.
And so I knew shortly after that I was not going to stay in that town. I knew I was going to leave that place. I knew it. But I knew if I said that to my mother, she would be furious with me. And I did say, I'm going to leave. And she said, no, but I'm going to go to college one day. She said, who's going to pay for it? And I said, I don't know, but I'm going to figure it out. Fast forward, I was accepted to Yale Summer High School. And I knew if I told my mother, it was going to be a fight. So I told my grandmother. And I said, now you have to help me get away before she finds out. And when she found out, my mother looked at me and she did not speak to me for days because I had managed to figure a way to get away from her that she could not control. And sometimes I think that really has informed a lot of my actions in the future, because I now know that sometimes you can't say that you have an ambition. You can't say, because just putting it out there, people will knock it down. You have to be very quiet about it.
Deborah Putzbeck from Tallahassee and asked the following question. What are your thoughts about how Black history can become part of mainstream American history? Its absence has profound implications on so many levels.
I think that historians need to go and talk to people who lived in these parallel worlds during this period of time. Like with my friend who writes for the Wall Street Journal. He didn't even know that there was this whole life that we were living. There were places like Idlewild and Oak Bluffs and Fox Lake where upper income Black people went. He didn't know that people would drive all the way out of their way to avoid going through Mississippi, or that when you pulled up to a service station, that you didn't know what was going to happen. That Exxon was the first service station in America to carry the Green Book. I think historians need to go back and look at the parallel world that existed during this period of time. Yes, there's the American story and the accepted American story of what I call the winners. But for every story that you read about in the accepted textbooks that is shaped by Texas and North Carolina and those states with huge school systems, there's a world out there that is being quite denied and quite ignored. And I think that historians and the writers of those books must talk about that world much more honestly. But that's a difficult thing to do. Why? Because it holds a mirror up to the people who participated in the denial. And most people don't want to own that participation.
So let me follow on Deborah's question with another question, which is, it relates to your conversation with Jan Miles.
Yes.
And whether there's a need for a Green Book today. And is there a need for a Green Book today?
It exists the way it existed in the old days, primarily by word of mouth. Jan Miles creates a publication that keeps track of or catalogs all of the incidents of road violence, of violence against African Americans. She lives in New Orleans. It's a powerful book. It's a really powerful book. We read it on the trip, and I was so looking forward to meeting her, but I was also anxious about it because after you read all that violence that occurred to Black people, you can't help but internalize it a bit or see it in terms of your own family. So as she made me aware, there is sort of the version of the Green Book that exists on the internet where Black people share information. It's like Airbnb noir, where Black people who've had bad experiences with Airbnb create this alternate world in which they share this information. So I think it's occurring. It's unfortunately that it's still necessary, but as William Williams, an architectural professor at the University of Cincinnati, said, he still wouldn't drive through this one town in Texas where that Black man was dragged behind a truck. And most people wouldn't even remember the name of the town. So via the internet, you'd probably be warned not to drive through that town. So this exists in a way. On a personal level, I do wonder Today we drive on the interstate. Today, chances of your getting stopped are less, but you could just be unfortunate on a bad day and hit the wrong person, or be stopping beside the road and somebody just wants to harass you. It's possible today. So I think knowing how to drive safely, especially for African American and brown people on the road, is still very important. It's not as blatant as it once was, but it's still an important thing to consider.
Yeah. So you and I talked. I said I was going to do a word association. I was going to give you a phrase and just get your reaction. So I didn't share with you the words, and you agreed to trust me that I put yourself in my hands. So thank you for that. It's relevant actually to what you're saying. So let me offer two. So this is a quote that you made a couple of times in the podcast. The good Lord saw us through this trip again. You just talk about it.
Directly to my parents and so many Black people I know. When we would travel to Lake City, Florida. And if you've read The Warmth of Other Suns by Isabel Wilkerson, you'll realize that this county was one of the most violently racist counties in Florida. We had no idea about that growing up, but we would get there. And my grandmother would say, well, the Lord brought us through this trip again. And I can imagine that so many Black people said those words once they arrived at the safe harbor, whether that safe harbor were relatives, whether it was a place in the Green Book or a hotel like the A.G. Gadsden or the Benmore Hotel or the Lorraine Motel, because once you got there, you knew you were safe and you could breathe.
The talk. Something
that every Black parent has, especially with their Black sons. It's about what to do if you're stopped. Hezekiah Jackson talks about this in the first series with his nephew, and they had tried to have the conversation with his nephew, but his nephew felt that they were just telling, as Hezekiah said, a fairy tale until it happened to them. Today, you have to really expand that. It's not only with your Black sons, you need to have it sometimes with your Black daughters too, but in particular with Black males, because as Hezekiah said, it's still harder on Black males. So you give them the protocol, where to keep your wallet, make sure both of your hands are on the wheel, don't make any unnecessary moves, because you never know how trigger happy that person will be who stops you.
So I'm going to follow that with a question from Jamel Moore. What advice do you have for people of color who may experience success or are presented with new opportunities, but feel it is due to white people giving them the opportunity because of their ethnicities versus actually earning the success or opportunity on their own?
That's an interesting question. Opportunities come in all forms. Sometimes the opportunity may not come the way you want it to come, but it's an opportunity that you can turn to your advantage over time. I am sure that in my life, exactly what you described has happened to me. But I always think that if this happens to me, that I'm going to grab this and try to turn it into something that's better for me. I've had it turn badly, where I have been asked to leave a position or a job because the box that person had so neatly put me in, I didn't really fit in that box. And my skills were way beyond that. And so I learned. And then the next time an opportunity like that came along, I learned how to shape myself a little bit better. I think that, as I said, opportunities come in many forms. Sometimes you have to view it as an opportunity to make progress and to help somebody else learn while also helping yourself acquire new skills. One of the things I learned as an entrepreneur, and I had the experience where I got jobs, and I knew I got the job because I'm a Black guy doing training on Wall Street. There are not a lot of me around. But I also became very aware of the fact that sometimes in order to make the progress that I wanted, I had to dumb myself down. That was a tough one at first, a tough one. But it was a headhunter who said to me, Alvin, people want you to do these jobs, but they don't want all of you. So you need to decide what part of you you're going to give them for that job. And that's when I was able to say, okay, Alvin Hall, who likes art, who goes out to the art galleries, that's over here. I need to tell them about that Alvin Hall. Alvin Hall, who goes to theater, I don't need to tell them about that Alvin Hall. I come in to do my job, and I do my job well, and gradually they may change. And I certainly get more knowledge.
I want to share just, it's a comment, not a question, from Radu Stoshida. Your experience is indeed a very emotional one. I hope I pronounced that, your last name, Radu, properly. I apologize if I didn't. Your experience is indeed a very emotional one, which proves the power that we can have in order to overcome the barriers that others impose upon us. I'm coming from a homogeneous community, but I was low income. I faced similar situations from the people in my school. Who? You will become a professor? Don't you know your place? While some of us can become empowered by those situations, it saddens me to think of how many people fail to succeed because they cannot overcome those negative thoughts projected upon them. Thank you.
Thank you.
And Janelle thanks you as well for your reflections on his question, or on their question, sorry.
And that's the beauty of Hank Sanders' story. As he says, he said it took him, I forget, 6 years before he was able to go to law school. And when he got in law school, during that 6 years, he would run that scene through him again and again, and it would give him strength. By the way, he went to Harvard.
Right. So I'm mindful that we're coming towards the end here, Alvin, and I want to ask kind of a big question. I'll make it kind of a two-parter. The first will be a kind of comment here. But in several places in the podcast, you raise, and I think others raise, Dr. King's idea that the arc of the universe is long, but it bends towards justice. And that's a reflection that's made in several points here. Can you, using that perhaps as a touchstone or a foundation, how did this project change you? How do you think today about, differently than you did in day zero of 2015, about race in America and the challenge facing Black Americans, Americans of African descent, those of African descent who are in our country, and others of color in our society?
I think that Dr. King's statement comes from a deep, deep religious belief, and that there is justice over time. I think the recent election gave us hope that that sort of arc is true. But I see things a little differently after this trip and after many experiences as an entrepreneur on Wall Street working for different companies. Over the years, Americans started to make a compromise, and that compromise was whether racism was a moral flaw or a personality trait. And if you look at the fact that lots of people voted for people who were blatant racists, Strom Thurmond, Jesse Helms, George Wallace, and these people implemented rules in those towns and cities that maintain discriminatory practices. But people will say, people who supported them, oh, their children grew up to be so well, they keep their house nice, they're such a wonderful family, they're really, really lovely people. Yet, their actions indicated that they were racist or supported racism. So in America, over time, we moved racism from a category of a moral issue into a personality issue. And today we're seeing very much the consequences of that. And I thought about this a lot during driving the Green Book. We would get to these towns and I would have the Jim Crow laws and I would think, how could you think that people who would enact these laws were good people? Because the morality has been divorced from it. I'm hoping that, and if you think about that, that's deeply ironic in a country that claims to be so religious. But what did Martin Luther King say was the most segregated day in America? Sunday. So in a way, it's surprising it's not. What I believe the future holds is that the younger generation will begin to see things differently. I went to a couple of the Black Lives Matter marches, and it was the diversity of people that really inspired me. Age, ethnic group, socioeconomic. It was brilliant. That made me believe that Martin Luther King's statement was true.
So Alvin, I'm going to share with you two comments that just came in, and then we'll end tonight's session on that beautiful comment here. From Janet Adams, thank you so much. I hope you'll continue to seek ways to share your interviews and your wisdom with our country and the world. We need to learn more to create a better and more just world. Jenny Lee, quote, opportunities come in many forms, close quote. Your talk, and especially that your quote, have given me much strength and a way forward for me to thrive as a young woman of color and also to raise and support others. Thank you. And Julie McVeigh, Alvin Hall, thank you. This conversation was beautiful with an open heart and sharing your wisdom. I'm a financial advisor and I'm heartened to think of someone of your character in finance. Thank you for all the work that you have brought to this world and your energy to give back to the Bowdoin community tonight, Julie. And all I can say, Alvin, is yes, and thank you. You've given so much of yourself to Bowdoin in so many ways, but you are giving so much of yourself to the world. This podcast and your all the wisdom and insights and so much of yourself that you have shared are so meaningful to us. I'm proud to know you and call you my friend, and I know that the Bowdoin community is proud that you are part of our community and to call you our friend as well. So thank you, and thank you everyone for being here, for great questions, and for sharing this important conversation with the members of our community. Thank you, Alvin.
You're most welcome, and thank you for having me. I really enjoyed the talk.